Mr. Mayor, we have Councillor Schreider absent this evening. We have all other members present, so you may begin.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Then we'll call to order this planning meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores and say good evening to all members of the committee and all members of the public who are watching us via the live stream this evening. We're glad that you're with us. The second item on the agenda is additions, deletions, amendments, and we have none of them. We have no disclosures, but we might, actually I should say, we probably could. Do we have any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening that anybody wishes to declare? I don't see any. So we have none of them, but if you do have one, of course, you can declare one anytime you need to. We have no minutes to adopt this evening. So we're on to public meetings and we have 3 of those. And just before we get into them, I'll just let folks know how those will proceed. The public meetings will begin with a presentation from our county planner. And then I will open the public meeting. We'll begin by hearing from the applicant or representative of the applicant, and then we can hear from members of the public who have comments or questions about the application, following which we'll close the public meeting and we'll take questions for clarification from members of the committee. And then that will wrap up the public meetings. And I'll just remind folks that if you want to stay informed about any of the applications we're going to hear tonight, I will ask the planner at the end of each of the public meetings to give you information on how you can do that. And it's important to be clear, council will not be making any decisions on any of the matters before us on the public meetings this evening. This information is presented for information so we can hear input from the public, and we will make a decision at a later date. So with all of that out of the way, we'll go on to 5.1, which is L 2021-012, Z 2021-066, Lord Elgin Estates Developments, Waterloo, Devonshire, Goderich Streets. And we'll turn it over to Karina Smith, the planner, to give us the presentation. Good evening, Karina.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight's presentation is on Lord Elgin Estates Development, and I will just get the presentation on screen. Okay, thank you for your patience. So this evening we are looking and considering a local official plan amendment application as well as a zoning bylaw amendment application. They are for Lord Elgin Estates Development Limited, and they are situated, the property specifically, at Waterloo Street and Devonshire Road. The purpose of the application is to amend the Town of Saugeen Shores official plan to add a site-specific provision to the highway commercial designation to permit high-density residential uses. And similarly, it's also to amend the local zoning bylaw to add a site-specific provision which would also allow residential uses in accordance with the residential 4th density zone. If approved, the amendments would facilitate a multi-unit development in a residential format, in addition to the commercial uses that are already permitted on the site. So you can see from this air photo, we do have the property highlighted. I do want to clarify that for the purposes of the amendment, the area would be situated just behind the existing hotel on the site. It would not encompass the entirety of the property. As you can see, there are commercial uses already in existence, which includes the hotel, the grocery store, and there are some vacant lands as well to the south. And then there are existing residential and proposed residential uses on other sides of the proposed site. This photo is taken from the rear of the existing hotel, looking in the northwest direction. As you can see, the lands are currently vacant. Similarly, also still looking from the rear of the existing hotel towards the existing townhouse and single-family development that is further to the west. And the next shot is towards Devonshire Road and Waterloo Street, showing the existing residential development in addition to the existing 4-story multi-unit buildings to the south. And the final photo for the committee's consideration today is looking from Waterloo Street towards Goderich Street, and you can see the existing hotel in that frame. So circulated with the agency and public documents was a concept plan. It does show 3 4-story buildings that are apartment in nature. There was a second revised concept that was provided, and I wanted to highlight for the committee and public's consideration that both of these concept plans are conceptual at this point in time. There could be amendments through the future site plan process through the town, but this is just showing some of the options or layouts for the site. So this second revised concept that's presented here does still include 3 4-story buildings, but it also shows the proposed hotel expansion of the existing building that is further to the east. So in consideration of these applications, we did look at the provincial policy statement, particularly the settlement area policies. We did note that this site is in a primary urban community, being Port Elgin, in the county official plan, and so we did take those policies into consideration, as well as the highway commercial designation in the town of Saugeen Shores official plan, and the highway commercial zoning, which is currently on the site. In our review, we did speak to the efficient use of land and resources, and settlement areas are to be areas where development is directed to take use of the existing infrastructure that's there and to ensure that the wise use of those lands and resources can occur. In this instance, the development will utilize the existing municipal street network, and it does have immediate highway exposure. The lands will be connected to the existing municipal water and sewer services. As well, it will be connected to the existing stormwater system through the pond that's immediately adjacent to the site, as well as to connections to the existing stormwater infrastructure that currently exists. Through documentation provided by the applicant, they have demonstrated that with the additional residential use on the site, they still would have sufficient capacity, and there is the infrastructure available for them to connect into. We also did look at the mixed use policies of the province, as well as in the county and local official plans. And typically in the highway commercial designation, residential uses are limited to those that are accessory to the main commercial use. And high density mixed use development is typically only permitted in the local official plan in the core commercial area. So that would be in the downtown core. And that's why there is an amendment required to the local official plan to permit high density mixed use development on this site. There was some concern expressed by the public that there would be a loss of commercial uses on the site, and that was not the case through the documentation provided by the applicant. It is still intended to be a mixed commercial residential development, but to ensure that there is a commercial component going forward, the town could identify a specific percentage or unit count or floor area that could be dedicated to that commercial use. With respect to the mixed uses and compatibility, the town has identified that it will require site plan approval, and so issues with respect to landscaping and urban design can be addressed through the site plan process to ensure the development is integrated and cohesive, not only on the site, but with the adjacent land uses as well. So the policy regime does currently support a range and mix of housing types. And in this case, they would be looking, in addition to the local official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, as noted earlier, to allow for residential uses in accordance with the residential 4th density zone. And that's the high mix or high density residential zone in the town's zoning bylaw. And it does permit apartment dwellings, which is shown on the concept plans that the applicant has provided, but it also does permit multi-unit dwellings, nursing homes, retirement homes, and townhouse dwellings among its permitted uses. And this proposal would provide opportunities for additional high density format in the town. It would also meet the county and municipal target, which does require 30% of proposed dwelling units to be medium density or higher. There are additional targets that both the county and the town look for with new residential development, and they typically look for 30% of that development to be in a rental housing format, for 30% of that to be affordable or attainable. And through that, we often use density targets as one tool to reach that attainable target. And in this case, with a high density development format proposed, the density would be between 40 and 90 units per hectare. A lot of the comments that we did receive at the time this report was provided were relating to traffic. So the high density residential development as well as the highway commercial development are required to have frontage or access onto an arterial or collector road, which will be the case here. The access point should be limited to one point, or there should be the use of service roads, which would also be provided in this instance. And the traffic analysis was updated. So there was a larger analysis done for the larger subdivision, and that was reviewed in the context of this proposal. And it was concluded that there would be no impact on the immediate subdivision traffic, as well as the traffic in the immediate area. Sorry, as it relates to active transportation, there are sidewalks already in the area, and there are designated bike lanes close by. And internal vehicle and pedestrian movement will be reviewed as part of the site plan process, and that will be in accordance with the zoning bylaw requirements. So the county did circulate out to various review agencies, which is normal practice. We did receive comments back from staff at the town who have identified that they are supportive of facilitating the types of housing that are proposed with this development concept. And it was identified, as noted earlier, that site plan control would be required and would deal with issues relating to servicing, landscaping, building elevations, etc. There were no objections received from the historic Saugeen Métis, and the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority identified that the proposal is acceptable. And as noted earlier, there were public comments received at the time this report was provided to town staff. We had received 15 public comments in objection to the application. Some of the issues raised by the public did include increased traffic, increased noise, decreased commercial options, a potential loss of views or green space or open space, and impacts to infrastructure and services, as well as height and density. So in the agenda today, there were several comments, public comments provided. There were 2 provided after the public notice in the agenda for you today. And I did want to highlight for the committee's consideration, there was one additional public comment that did not make its way to the agenda, and I will read that for you now. This comment does come from Marlene and Bruce Giles, and they write, on Monday, December 13th, we received a revised concept plan relating to the above file. This was made available following our phone call to Karina Smith. I have no idea why copies were not forwarded to all who received the mailing of the original concept. The requested change places Building B in position to unnecessarily change the view from the units in the Troon Estates, which face Waterloo Street. From the concept plan, it is impossible to accurately determine the building setback from Waterloo Street, but we believe that it is east of the existing stormwater retention pond, which Ms. Smith agreed remains as is. Our suggestion is to move Building B to the easterly edge of the site and turn it 90 degrees. This leaves less impact on the current residential units and permits the applicant to achieve the same result. The parking would change accordingly. Any consideration is appreciated. Sincerely, Marlene and Bruce Giles. So in summary, the applications are seeking to add residential high density uses in the highway commercial designation, and similarly to add the high density residential use in accordance with the residential fourth density zone in the zoning bylaw. And as Mayor noted earlier, we will be bringing back a report later, which takes into consideration any comments arising from this meeting. that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Karina. So we'll move on now then to the public meeting, and we'll begin by hearing from the applicant or representatives of the applicant. I see we have Dave Aston and Stephen Cobain on my list. Are they with us, and do they wish to speak? Or there's Mr. Aston.
Good evening, Mayor Charbonneau. Just a few comments I can pick up on, and Mr. Cobain is here if there are any detailed questions as it relates to the traffic or the servicing. Do appreciate the presentation by Ms. Smith. It was very thorough and covered all of the details associated with the proposal and provided a great overview of the policies that we've been working through with county and township staff. We see this proposal as an opportunity to continue to build on creating a complete community in this area. The proposal for the additional high density residential, just wanted to point out, and Ms. Smith did point out, that it's not intended to remove entirely the commercial uses. In fact, it's looking to provide an opportunity for some mixed use in that block. And there is provision or opportunity for mixed use buildings also to locate within that block. So there could be the potential for commercial or retail or office or other type uses on the ground floor. So we wanted to make this block really as flexible as possible from a commercial perspective, but also build on the success of the apartment uses that really are in proximity across the street from the site, and to continue to build that type of housing supply within the municipality. We see it as a good location to do so based on the policies in regard to location near an arterial road, supports walkability really to the existing commercial uses and amenity areas surrounding the area. And the traffic and servicing analysis work has concluded that there is appropriate infrastructure and capacities to accommodate what's being proposed. I would also echo what Ms. Smith had mentioned, that the concept is really a concept to provide some context to a bit of the design thinking, trying to locate the buildings to the exterior, put parking interior so that it could be shared with the commercial and the hotel expansion, and take advantage of the views of the storm pond in the context of it being an open space. There's no impact to that open space storm pond area. The proposal is entirely outside of that. What's shown on the concept now is a 10-meter setback from Devonshire Road. Again, purely conceptual, but that gives you just a bit of a context of what we were showing. And again, we see opportunity there to build on landscaping along Devonshire, and there may be opportunity with the residential to increase coverage of green space with landscaping versus the potential for all commercial and large parking areas associated with commercial. So we do see there are some design benefits associated with the proposal. I think that would be all that we would have to say. We'll continue to work with staff and to consider any of the public comments that have been received or may be received this evening. So happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. So no other speaker on behalf of the applicant then, Dave? That's it. I can move on to the public?
Yeah, I would move on to the public. Like I say, if we need to get into to respond to some of the details, we'd be happy to come back and Mr. Cobain could provide some details.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for that. Then we will move on and open the floor to public comments. And I have on my list one individual member of the public, Jerry Murphy. And I see Jerry's name there. I don't see his face yet. Are you there, Jerry? There you are.
Here now.
Okay, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay, yes, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposal. I've got a few questions and I've got some comments. And I'd like to ask the questions first. If the answers are available, that's great. If not, then perhaps the answers could be forwarded to me at a future time. Really, there's only three questions that I'm not clear from the presentation or from the material that's been submitted yet. And that's and they're also interrelated. One is the total size of the property, the total number of units that are potential on the property if it was built out to high density residential, and the total population that would result from a total high density residential build out, which, as I understand it, is one possible outcome of approving this proposal. So those are the three questions: the size of the parcel, total potential units, total potential persons.
Sure. Well, why don't we put those questions to Mr. Aston? Mr. Aston.
Through Mr. Mayor, I was just looking up the total size because that will get me to all of those numbers. If you give me a minute or two here to confirm it, I will get back to you with all of those numbers. Perhaps we could hear the comments and all.
Sure. So, Mr. Murphy, if you have some comments you want to make, Mr. Aston will come up with the information. We'll get the answers at the end. Do you have some other comments you'd like to make while he looks the information up?
Yes, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so in terms of the comments, the planner and the presentation and the material that I've seen available make reference to how well this matches up with provincial policies and county planning policies. I think what's important to recognize is that's very general, high-level policies. And basically what they're saying is that urban land uses should go in urban areas, and land uses in urban areas should make efficient use of the resources and the services. It's really any urban land use would satisfy those policy objectives, including the current highway commercial designation. It satisfies those higher policy objectives equally as well, if not better, than the high density residential that's being proposed. So the fact that the high density residential matches up with it shouldn't really come as a surprise to anybody, because any urban use, for the most part, would match up to it. The other is that in terms of and I guess the other point on that is it's not necessary to change to high density residential to any degree on this property in order to have a perfect match with those provincial and county planning policies. The existing designation does that very well. In terms of the town's official plan, it designates the subject property as highway commercial. There's nothing in that existing plan or in the highway commercial designation that permits high density residential, or even hints at the potential of high density residential on these lands. So there's, and the plan and its existing policies and designations, including the subject lands, have already been identified as providing an appropriate sort of balance and mix of land uses throughout the entire urban area. So there's no need to change the existing designation in order to achieve any of those local planning policy objectives. The existing designation does that very well. The lands that are designated residential within the municipality, at the time they were designated, presumably they were deemed appropriate to meet the demands for all the various types of housing types and tenures. These lands weren't identified as being necessary to meet those objectives. And presumably the existing designations still are adequate, unless there's been some overall review of the need for additional residential land. And this site has been identified as necessary to meet that need. The existing residential designations in terms of the range of housing types and tenures, the existing residential designations provide ample opportunity for that. without a need to identify additional lands for high-density residential use. The local plan also identifies the need for new and continuing employment opportunities. Highway commercial land uses provide jobs and longer-term employment opportunities. High-density residential will provide some short-term construction jobs, but really provides no long-term employment opportunities, and certainly nothing to the extent that the existing highway commercial designation would provide. In terms of the planning for the immediate area, again, as I mentioned, the highway commercial designation doesn't permit high-density residential and clearly doesn't anticipate it. As was mentioned by the county planner, I believe the only area where that is anticipated is in the core area. If it had been anticipated here, the policies would have identified these lands the same as they did in the core commercial area. The planning for the immediate Summerside residential community did not anticipate these lands being used as residential. If they're expected to be residential or needed as residential lands, I would have expected they would have been identified at that time. So recent planning for the immediate area didn't identify any need for high density residential in this location. High density residential on these sites too as well isn't in any way consistent with the role or function of a highway commercial designated land. It's completely out of sync with the whole purpose and intent of the highway commercial designation. And just to simply tack a few words onto it in this particular instance, saying we can also have high density residential is just doesn't seem like the proper and appropriate way to completely change the focus from the highway commercial designation that's on the lands now. Heightened density was mentioned in the county planner's presentation. I think clearly the heightened density that's being proposed for this proposal is clearly not in keeping with the predominantly low density, low rise built form. Yes, there is one apartment complex on the opposite side of Devonshire. But with the exception of that, the pictures from the county planner's presentation show it very well. It's very hard to see the little bumps on the horizon that the rooftops of the existing development produce. And the difference in terms of the built form is quite dramatic. The other thing as well, I guess, is that according to the developers' consultants, the servicing and the traffic can be absorbed without much impact on the existing communities. And I don't have anything to dispute that, but it just strikes me that as these lands have never been designated as residential, any of those other types of studies or plans that were put in place, whether they're servicing, whether they're transportation, whether they're parks and recreation, whether they're schools, none of that planning anticipated the number of people that this proposal will produce. So maybe today there's capacity, but that population hasn't been built into the planning for all of those other community services. In terms of the proposal, really, there's no certainty as to anything. There's no certainty as to what the actual ultimate land use will be. Maybe it'll all be highway commercial. Maybe it'll all be high density residential. Maybe it'll be some combination of high density residential and commercial. So the lack of certainty makes it inappropriate to move forward with an approval at this point in time for the proposal. That lack of certainty, I think, also applies just as well to the actual built form of the site. The plans that have been presented are conceptual and can bear absolutely no resemblance to what actually gets built on the site. Measures like site plan control provide some opportunities for the municipality to influence the built form, but there's no opportunities for the general public to influence the built form. Any of the concerns that are being expressed now, saying site plan approval will address them, really doesn't provide any opportunity for the public to continue to influence the built form that might occur on this site. So that's it for the comments. And I'll just sort of wait on the answers to the questions.
Sure. Well, we'll turn it back over to Mr. Aston and see if he has those answers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do, and if I may add to the answers a couple points of clarification, that would be great. So the area that is subject to the application, recall Ms. Smith confirmed that it's only a portion of the lands is 2.77 hectares. A portion of that is picking up the expansion of the hotel, but the land subject to the application are 2.77 hectares. The zone that's being proposed, the R4, permits a density up to 90 units per hectare. So that'd be plus or minus 250 units. The concept plan that was circulated did not show 250 units. And as you're aware, as you get into site plan and give consideration to parking and open space and landscape percentages, ultimately that drives you to the total count, and that would be site plan consideration. And then population, staff could probably confirm, but if you just assumed kind of apartment rental type units at 2 people per unit, you're in the ballpark of 500 people. So that's a bit of a summary of the numbers. I just wouldn't mind the opportunity. There was a comment about recent planning, and I just wanted to point out that the official plan of the town, as far as I understand, was approved in 2014, and the county has been going through land use analysis and comprehensive review details, which the town has been involved with. So the 2014 plan wouldn't really pick up on the recent discussions and planning framework associated with creating complete communities, intensification, efficient use of land. It does speak to those, but it doesn't reflect the more current county exercise and planning exercises that have been undertaken very recently and still in process associated with the county official plan review, which will ultimately lead into a town official plan review. And as far as comment on low-rise form, the plan and the zoning associated with Summerside from Devonshire to 10th concession on the south side of Waterloo Street is all planned for, I'll call it medium density. So townhouses are permitted. And then on the other side of the north side of Waterloo Street, there is another block. It's referenced as block 55 in the plan of subdivision that is also zoned for higher density R4. So the broader plan, has a mix of residential uses, but what I would call the Devonshire Waterloo Street corridors have certainly been planned for a greater mix of higher density uses. And so just wanted to share that information in the context of the recent planning and the ongoing planning.
Okay, thank you. Any final thoughts, Mr. Murphy?
Well, thank you for that information, but I don't think that significantly changes the thrust of my concerns about what's being proposed being completely out of sync with the whole role and function of a highway commercial area.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Council has heard your comments and we appreciate them. So thank you for giving us your time this evening and have a good evening. Are there other members of the public Mr. Murphy was the only one that I had on my list, but I guess I'll ask the planner and the clerk just to confirm for me that there aren't other members of the public with us who'd like to speak.
No, there's not, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and the planner has read the written submissions that have been made since the agenda was published. So council has heard all the written submissions that were submitted. So that brings us then to the end of the public meeting this evening, and we'll move on then to questions from members.
So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think we'll just maybe give the mayor a chance to sign back in here.
He's in the waiting room.
I've never done that before. Of course, I would do that tonight.
Just thanks,
Hey
Allison.
guys, I'm back.
We apologize.
No, that's all right. Okay, where was I? Yeah, so we'll open it up to questions from members, Councillor Grace, and then the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is for Ms. Smith. During your presentation, you stated that 30% of the new housing should be affordable, and you said or attainable. And so I wondered, is it really affordable as defined by the town and county's affordable housing definition? Or could it be attainable, which I understand to be more flexible?
Yes, thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. The county policy and similar, the local official plan policy does specifically target a 30% affordable housing, and it does have a specific definition for that. That is not specifically addressed for each development as it comes in. That is kind of a county-wide or a municipal-wide target. And so this would, in a high density format, certainly assist with that affordability. I can defer to the agent for the applicant. My understanding is the tenure of this particular development has not been confirmed at this point in time, but those discussions could certainly continue as we move forward and before we bring that report back.
Okay, then the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to, I'll start with that 30% affordability. And Mr. Mayor, I think it's something that staff, pending the council's decision whether or not this zoning change is approved or not. But I think in the interim, it would be a real good idea for planning staff, to reach out with the developer. To talk about these 170 units and again, if approved, and it's a public meeting tonight, no decisions have been made. But if you think about 30% of the units, 51 units being affordable below market rent, we have a 0.5% vacancy rate here in our community right now for rental housing. There's a big problem here in our community with rentals. And so I just want to start with that. I was going to finish with it, but since Councilor Grace has mentioned it, I think it'd be important for staff to reach out to the developer to talk about our toolkit and what we can do with development charges and other incentivizations in terms of helping out with this kind of development anywhere in our community, not just this development, but anywhere in Saugeen Shores as these applications surface. So we'll see what the decision is in a month or so, but I want to start with that. I did want to ask Steve, if I could, about the transportation number. There was a fair number of people on Waterloo Street talked about about transportation study. And Steve, I was just wondering, we talked about the revised, the peak hour numbers, the traffic generation, the peak hour numbers, and then we talked about revised peak hour numbers from traffic generation. When was the first traffic study done, and has it been revised? And what does the revised transportation study, the traffic numbers say, traffic generation during peak hours, Steve? Can you just tell me the difference?
Yep, sure. So as part of the original draft plan approval of the Summerside subdivision, the developers had retained a traffic engineer to complete a traffic study. That first study was done in 2012, and that was completed by Paradigm traffic engineers who've done a lot of work in the Saugeen Shores area. As part of the approval phase 2, which included the construction of Devonshire Road, the installation of the traffic signals at Devonshire and Goddard Street. And also, as part of that, we looked at the roundabouts too that are on Devonshire. We had the town required us to update that traffic study. So that was the traffic study was updated in 2016, May of 2016. And those are the numbers I've been using. They looked at a couple of different scenarios in that 2016 report. And again, the commercial development was part of that, that updated traffic study.
Thanks for that. And Mr. Mayor, I have a few points here, but Mr. and Mrs. Giles, I was listening to Ms. Smith's comments. Mr. Giles, the letter that we haven't seen yet, but she read, tweaked my interest a little bit. And he talked about turning the development 90 degrees and block B, creating, relocating on an easterly direction. And I just haven't had a lot of time to think about that, but it just tweaked my interest. I think about the people in Waterloo, where we've got a lot of the letters from, and there's Mr. and Mrs. Giles. I think have a good point, have a good suggestion, recommendation, and I'm just wondering if staff and planners, representatives here tonight could take that away and take a look at it, Dave, and just see if there's, the orientation of the buildings could be adjusted at all. I think there might be some value in taking a look at that. The one question I had, a couple of other questions, but the 10-meter setback in Devonshire is to me a good thing. You tweaked my interest again when you said, and you didn't use enhanced landscaping, but I'll use it. I think that 10 meters is significant, and that's good. You've left a fair amount of green space in this development for enhanced landscaping plans. So good for you as planners and the developer. The question about Waterloo Street, though, the stormwater retention pond would remain. I see another green space to the south of the retention pond. What is the setback? What is the setback along Waterloo Street, and what are the opportunities there? I know that we'll be talking about this during site plan. I understand that, but I just think I would like to get a little bit of a feel tonight for where we could be heading with this plan. But what's the setback on Waterloo?
Through Mr. Mayor to the councillor, I don't have the number on, but if you see on the concept where it goes along Waterloo, and then there's a kind of return south along the storm pond. So the building is set back up 7.5 meters from that point. So I would say what's shown is for sure 15 meters setback from Waterloo at this point.
And in the widest portion there. And again, Dave, that would obviously allow for an enhanced landscaping program there as well, correct or not?
Through Mr. Mayor, the idea was, and I'll use your words, enhanced landscaping, because that was our thinking along Devonshire and Waterloo Street, and then to provide some opportunity to really landscape at the corner where the roundabout is as well. Okay. So we're providing the setbacks, and again, we're really talking concept and the idea of putting that building 10 meters set back, there's some flexibility as to 10, 15, whatever it may be,
Right.
in recognition of the units on the other side of Devonshire as well. I guess we can always rotate buildings. I think what we were from a design perspective trying to avoid was driving up Devonshire, locating the buildings kind of around the interior perimeter, and all you see is a vast parking lot
Gotcha.
from Devonshire and Waterloo.
Yeah, we can go down this road a little bit tonight, but of course,
hear
you
it. I
know, what we're
understand.
talking
I
about
understand.
tonight is really the question is whether the use in general is appropriate. So
I understand, Mr. Mayor. We received a fair number of letters, and you know, there were some good comments in there, and I just think that I just wanted to introduce that. I know we'll get that with site plan, but the number of units you talked about, that parcel of land, the 2.77 hectares, would permit upwards to 250 units. This plan shows 170. If I got those numbers correct, the 250 and the 70.
Through Mr. Mayor, yes, that's kind of just the 250 is just a function of area times permitted density in the R4, and the
Right.
170 was us taking, similar style buildings to what you see across the street, laying them out and giving some consideration to parking. So
Okay.
it could be a few more, it could be a few less.
Gotcha.
But
thanks for that. And just Mr. Mayor, I would really encourage staff to, again, we don't know whether this revision is going to be approved or not, but I really encourage staff to go back, to the developer and talk about, the affordability question, the 30%. That is of interest to me from a housing perspective. I just think that, some point in time, this council has got to get serious about introducing below market rents into our developments, and so I hope that staff take that into consideration. And the orientation of the buildings, Dave, I just think that's something that the resident letter I thought had some good merit. So thank you, Mr.
sure, thank you. Are there further questions or comments? I guess I had a question for the planner on the proposed zone. So the suggestion is that we would permit residential uses in accordance with the residential fourth density zone, and the residential fourth density zone includes apartments, multi-unit dwellings, and some of the things you've laid out. It also includes street townhouses, townhouse dwellings, these kinds of things. And I just wonder, so stepping back at a macro level, my conception, and you're the planner, so you can tell me if my conception is goofy, but of smart planning in this regard is that, along the highway corridor, you would have commercial, and then step back from the commercial one step, and that's where you'd have your highest density residential. I mean, if you were starting from scratch, that's what you would do. You'd build very high density right next to the heavy commercial use, and then step back densities until you got further away from the core. So I guess what I don't want to see right now, the applicant's proposing apartments, and I understand that, and I believe that's what they're going to do. What I wouldn't want to do is set up zoning where 50 years from now, the apartments disappeared, or 100 years, and we had a bunch of townhouses there, because I don't think that would be what you'd want. Like, I think you'd want highest density. So is the intention to limit the what's permitted in this particular location to essentially apartment dwellings, to what's proposed here, and not offer up the rest of what's in R4? I guess I'll put that to the planner first, maybe, and Mr. Ashton, if you have a comment after, you can make it.
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. The intention in the application does not specifically identify a particular format, but it certainly would be, council could provide that or set that as a requirement in the zoning bylaw, as has been done in other locations with similar proposals.
Sure. Mr. Ashton, did you have a comment?
Mr. Mayor, I think that's something we can take back and discuss with the landowner. I generally agree with how you characterized where we put density. The one thing that I would maybe suggest is in other areas and maybe in the town, you're seeing different forms of townhouses. I'll just, for example, stacked townhouses. And so I would maybe want to leave the door open for some higher density style townhouse, but certainly understand what you're saying. You wouldn't want to see kind of this step back to kind of a low rise townhouse form. And that may perhaps that's something we can discuss with Ms. Smith and the landowner on how best to approach that language in the bylaw.
Sure, yeah, I think I would ask you to have that conversation and come back with something that is as narrow in focus as possible. Obviously something that, that you want to see, that gets you what you're talking about building here, but not something that offers up a lot of other options that may not be in the best interest of the municipality in decades to come. So that's my only question. If there's no other questions, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. It may not be the time for the question either, but I'm just curious because I know, I mean, with a few other subdivision plans that we had done, school board is where I'm going with this one for question is, at what point do they get notified of stuff like this when we're talking about population increase? Just because when we were down, I seem to remember one they had commented on that, just because you're building there, your kids may not attend the school in the zone. And I know there may have been some talks earlier as hopefully the Blue Water School Board will be looking to do something here sooner than later. But if we're going to add, a potential of 500 people at that end of town, as well as the rate that we're developing that, that's the school at that end of town is definitely not going to handle it. So I don't know at what point they reach out to the school board, if that's way down the line, or if it's something that you can put the bug in their ear sooner than later so that we can all be prepared for this.
We'll put that to the planner. Has the school board been circulated, and have we heard anything from them?
Yes, thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. The school boards were circulated. We did not receive any comments at the time this report was drafted, but we can certainly follow up with them with some pointed questions specifically on this application. Perfect.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's actually interesting. We haven't received communication because we have on some more recent developments. So I would definitely reach out to them again. That's a good point from the councillor. Are there other comments or questions at this time? Councillor Davinsky.
My apologies for the delay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I'm just getting my feet wet in this sort of thing, but I noticed, at least I thought so, all the complaints all mentioned traffic increase in the area and so on. Not complaints, but letters regarding the proposed development. And it was said that the study showed that the PM peak hours weren't something to worry about. Is there not more that should be done on this traffic study? Because the traffic on Devonshire already is pretty impressive, and we're adding another 178 apartments with 2 people each supposedly in them. Is there going to be a more detailed traffic impact study?
We'll put that to the planner.
I'm sorry. Yes.
No, that's fine.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. We can certainly look for additional information if that is the committee's desire. There was information provided, which also took into consideration the town's transportation master plan as well. If there's something more specific that the committee would like the applicant to look at, we can certainly bring that back.
I think, any further comments that you want to make when you return with the application about the impact of traffic would be welcomed by the committee. Certainly we would want to have reassurance that, the necessary work was done to ensure that, traffic is appropriately handled. So you can take the councillor's question and return to us with additional comments when you come back with a recommendation. Is that clear enough?
Yes, thank you.
Are there further questions or comments? I don't see any, so that will conclude this public meeting. And maybe, Karina, would you just remind the public, if they wish to be informed about this file, how they can reach out to you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If any members of the public do want to receive notification of this application, you can reach out to the county. Our information was provided on the public notice, but for your reminder, our email address is bcplpe@brucecounty.on.ca, or you can call our office and ask for me, Karina Smith, specifically.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. That brings us to the end of 5.1. And we will now move on to 5.2, which is Z 2021-081 Ryan Hennessy, 560 Waterloo Street. And we will begin with a presentation from our planner, Barbara Mugabe. Ms. Mugabe.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Chabano. To just take a few seconds to load the screen.
You bet.
Yes, so this zoning amendment application has been submitted by Mr. Hennessy for it's actually to facilitate his consent application. Earlier in the year, we received a consent application. That application was not accompanied by a zoning bylaw amendment application because the measurements on the site plan met all the requirements of the zoning bylaw. When we circulated the consent application, the town required the applicant to have prepared a survey of the property. It took a few months. When we finally got the survey, we required the applicant to submit the subject zoning bylaw amendment application because we noted there were several zoning deficiencies on the site. Some of the zoning deficiencies reflect the current situation on the ground, and there were also additional non-compliances that would result directly from the consent application. The subject land is 560 Waterloo Street. It's located at the southwest intersection of Johnston Avenue and Waterloo Street in Port Elgin. The site is within an established low-density residential neighborhood. In terms of other land uses, there are two schools nearby. There's the St. Joseph's Catholic School, as well as the Port Elgin Saugeen Central School. The site is not too far from the downtown core in Port Elgin. This is an image of the existing structure on the site. It's a 1.5-story detached house. The house is very close to the intersection. It actually encroaches into the Johnston Street road allowance. And it's also situated very close to along Waterloo Street. Mr. Hennessy is seeking to split the site in half to create a new residential building lot on the west half of the property. The lands to be severed are vacant, and the existing dwelling would be on the retained parcel. The amendment is seeking to add special provisions to the residential second density zone to facilitate the severance. Relief is requested to reduce the lot areas of both the severed and the retained lots from 450 square meters to 406.12 square meters. There is no other relief required for the severed parcel. Respecting the retained lands, relief is requested to reduce the front yard setback from 4.5 meters to 2.5 meters. The exterior side yard setback along Johnson Avenue from 4.5 meters to 0 meters, and the rear yard setback from 7.5 meters to 6.5 meters. I'll just speak to the land use policies. Port Elgin is a settlement area, and in accordance with the provincial policy statement, settlement areas shall be the focus of growth and development. This proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statement. The site is designated primary urban communities in the Bruce County official plan and residential in the Saugeen Shores official plan. Both plans allow the full range of residential uses. The zoning is residential second density R2, and the zone permits a single detached dwelling. We've circulated the application to the departments and agencies. Town staff have noted that services shall be provided to the severed and retained lots at the applicant's expense prior to final approval of the severance. The town will seek cash in lieu of parkland dedication. There is no objection from the historic Saugeen Métis. There's also no objection from the Conservation Authority. This site does not contain any natural hazard features or other environmental features of interest to the authority. We received several comments from members of the public. Some of the comments came in regards to the consent when we first received it. Mr. Derek Hammer of 538 Starford Street objects to the proposal to split the lot because it is within an established neighborhood with an established lot pattern. He says development on the severed lot would be too close to the neighboring property. There were letters of opposition received from Ms. Jody Mahan of 544 Johnson Avenue and from Mr. Jim Bass. They both explained that the size of the subject land was exaggerated on the site plan. These were the initial comments we received for the original consent application. At the time, Ms. Mahon explained that the application did not meet the zoning bylaw requirements and would create non-conforming lots in an area full of full-size residential properties. She had also mentioned that the existing house has a section on the back, which currently lies on town property. Mr. Jim Bays has some concerns. He says the landowner is operating a rooming house and has placed a house trailer within 1 foot of the rear lot line. Since we finalized the report, I received additional comments. Some of them are quite lengthy and there are graphics attached to the comments. So I'll include them in a subsequent report to committee. So as a summary, this application is seeking to amend the residential second density zone by adding special provisions. Relief is requested to permit both the severed and retained lots having reduced lot areas of 406.12 square meters, whereas the minimum requirement is 450 square meters. On the retained parcel, relief is also requested to reduce the front yard setback from 4.5 meters to 2.5 meters, the exterior side yard setback along Johnson Avenue from 4.5 meters to 0 meters, and the rear yard setback from 7.5 meters to 6.5 meters. The amendment will facilitate the consent application, which is seeking to split the subject lands into two to create a new building lot. In terms of a recommendation, the recommendation is for this application to be received as information. The intent is to report back to committee at a subsequent meeting with a recommendation report that would also address comments from members of the public. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Then we'll move on to our public meeting and we will begin with the applicant. And we do have the applicant with us this evening, Mr. Ryan Hennessy. Oh, and there he is. Mr. Hennessy, if you have comments for us, go ahead.
Good evening. Just a couple things on some of the letters that I received. I haven't received all of them. I did receive 3. One from the neighbor who's been quite vocal since the start of this attempted severance that she's not in favor of it. Just a couple comments on the most recent letter she's submitted, stating that there's a bus route, that it's a busy corner for the school. Both those are not accurate statements. There's no bus route. Yes, buses do drive by the house, but it's a normal 2-way stop. Also that there's going to be very little yard or green space. That's also not true. I intend to meet the land percentage that will be left for green space. There's also comments on the house and the side yard and front yard. The house was built in the 1800s, so obviously I can't change the original structure of the house. The second letter received was from somebody a few blocks away who coincidentally has the same last name as the neighbor. Again, some of the statements just about encroachments, they're not accurate. About tying in for sewer and hydro, I don't know if they're aware, but that's at the cost of myself if this is approved. And again, infringements will be non-conforming. That's not accurate. I don't intend on seeking to build it anything less than what's permitted. And then lastly, just about the survey, a survey was done by Hewitt and Milne out of Saugeen Shores area. So anything that's on their stamped survey should be accurate. The last one that was touched on during presentation, just about a boarding house. I'm not sure where that's coming from. There's not a boarding house. There is a couple fellows that work for me that live in the house, but it's by no means or a rooming house. Sorry, I'm not really sure what that means, but it's not a rooming house. And yeah, I guess the house trailer too. Last thing I just want to talk about the house trailer. It's a normal 30-foot trailer. It's my trailer. It's parked there for the winter. So just to put everyone's mind at ease, there's no one living in that trailer right now. So I know some of these comments aren't even anything to do with severing a lot, but I just wanted to clear some of those up just for council. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hennessy. So we do have two other members of the public to speak to us this evening. And the first one is Jody Mahan. Ms. Mahan, are you with us? I see her name there. It's taking a second to bring up. There she is. And we'll get your audio there. And we'll be good to go. There you go. No problem. Take your comment.
All right. Please. Yes, I am the owner of the house right next to Mr. Hennessy. My front side is his backyard, basically. I would like to point out that the standard size lot is what Mr. Hennessy has, and neither the lot as it is right now does not conform to the already existing bylaw requirements. There is an infringement, and I think Mrs. McGibby mentioned that the back part of the house is actually on town property, and both sides are infringing. They don't conform. That's why I called it non-conforming. As far as the newly introduced special provisions amendment that will reduce the required lot area from 450 to 406, this is not a minor change. It's a fairly big change in the regulations for an R2 residential, and it is an R2 residential zone. If you decide to allow the severance and zoning and allow a home to be built, which is in basically my neighbor's backyard, I do not believe there's already very little front yard, but I do not believe that there will be a lot of green space left once you get a house on there, because it is a standard lot. And both of these lots will be non-conforming. They will not be in keeping with the neighborhood. And our official, sorry, my throat's gone. The official plan that we have must be take it into consideration. We do have an official plan, and your neighborhood should be consistent. As far as Mr. Hennessy is saying that the bus route, St. Joseph's, there is a bus route. It goes twice a day. Mr. Hennessy, I do not believe has actually lived in the house since he bought it. There has been a lot of different people living there. So maybe there is a lot of traffic. Anyone who's been around St. Joseph's knows that. And there is no street parking on Johnson Avenue because of the avenue. You can't park on the street, and there is a sidewalk there as well. Again, now what I'm concerned about is that it's an amendment to an already existing format. We have bylaws for this. This is already zone residential R2. And if you decide to use this amendment without changing the existing bylaws and without total public input and support, we're getting into, again, what's happening. It's lot splitting. We already have an agreed upon bylaw, and I think it should be followed within already established neighborhoods. And this is an established neighborhood. I discussed this issue with the planning department about creating special amendments to sort of get around the zoning bylaw. And I said, will this decision potentially cause more of this division of lots? Any standard lot in Saugeen Shores, could this set a precedent? And he assured me that this is not the case. However, knowing human nature, if this is granted, human nature says that somebody else is going to want to do this as well, and have an amendment to basically the regulations that we've set out. I built my house in 2011, and I had to follow the zoning bylaws for this area. I made sure that the setback was the same as my neighbor. I followed all the building zones, but my next door neighbor now wants to basically not follow the same regulations that are in the R2 zone. Now, I would really, really, really like to respond to what Mr. Hennessy said about the application. And I want to talk about the way the application was presented to the public. The first application that I received, I got in March, and it was just to sever the lot. And the application stated the lot was 988.3 meters squared, which it wasn't. That's a lot. That's a very, very large lot. It's a standard lot. The average lot is 809 meters squared, I believe. So I immediately asked the file manager to check that. Was this not checked? Because we have zoning maps, we have taxation records. Could you not check that before sending this out to the neighbors? Because this was sent out to the neighbors. They said that no, this would be checked later. This is how it works. And okay. But I started thinking about that, and I thought, well, if that's the case, the neighbors now have got this information. It looks legit. And they're going to decide whether or not to give consent or respond or do whatever they want to do. But they're basing this on inaccurate information, because nowhere does it say this is going to be verified later. So that's the one thing. The second thing I wanted to say was the second application, which is a completely new application with the new zoning amendment and a different diagram attached. Now, Mr. Hennessy did not mention that. He mentioned that he had a survey, and yes, he did. It's an accurate survey. It was done by a company in Onsan. I agree with that, but that is not what was sent out with the application. What was sent out with the application, I've included with my letter, and it is not to scale. Okay, and it actually makes the lot look a lot larger than it actually is. Just like the first comment about the size of the lot the first time, this also has made what the lot look bigger than it actually is. I had this checked before I made said these things. I wanted someone else to take a look at this, and because I thought it wasn't to scale. I had a couple of people look at it, and they said that no surveyor would ever send this out because it's not to scale. It actually looks like an actual survey if you look at it. That was something that made me question what was going on. But the thing that I found out after I've written my letter, and I'm sure you all have a copy of that, and I hope you look at it, was that this zoning amendment, this new zoning amendment, was not sent out to my neighbors. I am the only person that actually, as far as I know, got this notice. And I'm not sure why, but that's what happened. Now, Mr. Hennessy mentioned that, oh, somebody wrote something about with the same last name as me. That was my father. He does live a block and a half away, but he got a notice. He and I both got a notice. He didn't get a notice for the first application. I have no idea why he got a notice, but he did, and he responded to it. My neighbor across the road, who will have to look at whatever is put on the property, did not get a notice. So I don't know. Anyway, that's what happened. That is what happened. But I guess my comment is that both of the things that were attached to and were sent out to the public were somewhat misleading about the size of the lot in both examples, about basically making it seem like the lot was larger than it is, and it's a standard lot. I think those are all the things I wanted to say. I don't know, I'm kind of.
Maybe we can just.
Sorry, one more thing. Sorry, Luke. I just wanted to conclude by saying we already have an agreed upon bylaw for an R2 residential zone, and it should be followed fairly and equally, I believe. If you want to add, quote, special provisions as a way to alter these zoning bylaws, then I think you need to have a much larger community input and agreement to change like a zoning bylaw like that, because it is a residential, it's not something else. And you've got to think that, you know, people in this neighborhood, a lot of the people have lived here a long time, and not just the monetary investment, but they also have an attachment to things. I just want to say I want to be notified of whatever decision that you make, obviously. And I would like in writing the rationale in which you came to your decision. I'd just like to know how you came about it.
Okay.
I hope I've said everything I wanted to.
We can give you a sec here, and I can maybe I just go to the planner and ask her a couple of issues raised there that I think we get clarity on from the planner. Sure. One is the question of the circulation of the of the documents. So maybe Ms. Mugabe could just clarify for us how the documents were circulated and if that circulation met our requirements under our bylaws, and also on the question of what was circulated and whether or not, you know, maybe perhaps you've heard Ms. Mahan's comments, and Ms. Mugabe, you can make a few comments on that just for council's edification.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So with respect to the circulation, the original consent application would have been circulated to property owners within a 60-meter setback from the subject land. The zoning amendment application gets circulated to a radius of 120 meters from the subject land. So anyone within that radius would have received the notices. With respect to the current site plan, Mr. Hennessy just drew the lines based on the survey. So, and I have submitted to Ms. Mahan a copy of the survey that a surveyor has prepared. So we do have a survey that has been prepared for this site, and those are the dimensions that are on the survey.
Okay, thank you for those comments then, and thank you for your comments, Ms. Mahan. Or you have one final comment to wrap up, Ms. Mahan? You're on mute right now if you're looking to talk.
Yeah, I would just like to comment about what was circulated. If Mr. Hennessy did this, it's not to scale. And, you know, why wouldn't he provide the actual survey he paid for that was accurate with the application? And I know for an absolute fact that that notice of 120 meters, I know exactly that my neighbor did not get one. And I don't know why. Actually, I know that there's more than a few people. So I'm just saying.
Yep, sure. Well, we've heard your concern, and we've had the response
Yep.
from the planner, and so all of that is noted, and the committee's heard it. So thank you for that, and thank you for your comments, Ms. Mahan.
Yep.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time this evening. And so we have one other member of the public who wishes to speak to us, and that is Mark Penneran. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Is Mr. Penneran with us, Linda?
Mr. Mayor, no, he is not.
Okay.
We have confirmed with Mark that he does not wish to speak to this application. So with respect to further speakers, we have no further speakers to the application.
Okay, thank you. I wonder, just before I turn it over to before I close the public meeting and turn it over to council, Barbara, would you just, so you mentioned that you had received some correspondence on this application between the closing of this and the creation of the agenda and tonight, and you mentioned that it was pretty extensive, and so I wouldn't ask you to read it, but I wonder, could you just hit the high points for us? Are there concerns in there in that correspondence that council has not heard, or issues that we should be aware of from the public that we're not yet aware of?
Okay. Yes, so the correspondence from Mr. James Mahon, he opposes the application, and he mentioned that the site plan is misleading, that the dimensions are exaggerated, which we have heard from Ms. Mahon. And then Ms. Jody Mahon did submit comments that include some graphics. So I'm going to include that in a subsequent report. But again, she touches on that the site plan is once again not accurate. She speaks to that there will be very little green space on the property once the new house gets built. She talks about the encroachment of the existing house, that there is no parking on the street due to the avenue and the sidewalk to the street. She talks about this being a corner lot and that there's obstructions to traffic. St. Joseph's is at a very busy street, she said. Let's see what else. Oh, and that the site is non-conforming.
Okay.
And then Mr. Bays is the one who raised the issue of there being too many people in the house. That is a boarding house. He also mentioned that the house is not a brick house, it's actually stucco. So it's a big difference in the description that's in the staff report. And so he opposes this proposal. He says we should not be changing the zoning bylaw. This would be equivalent to signing a blank check. If full details of such a project and timing would be presented, a consent application to be considered but not granted. So he does not want for council or committee to approve the application. So that's sort of a quick summary of the comments, but they do include graphics.
Yep. No, and you've said you'll include those next time, which is enough. I just wanted to make sure that we had all the high points of the public input we've heard. So that's great. Thank you for that. So with that, we'll conclude the public meeting and we will turn it over to members of council for questions for clarification. We'll start with the Vice Deputy Mayor and then go to Councillor Grace.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know this really doesn't really impact the zoning bylaw amendment. But for my own interest, I'd like to know, Mr. Hennessy, the trailer that's on your site that's not being used in the wintertime, were there people living that in the summertime?
No, it was parked at the Port Elgin Tourist Trailer Park, And unfortunately, we had a transient site because with COVID-19, we were able to use that for the last 2 years. So it's strictly just storage. The tongue of it is on my driveway, and the back of it is on the grass.
That's fine. I know it doesn't impact the amendment decision, but it tweaked my interest, and there was an acquisition being made there, and I wanted to make sure I had things absolutely accurate.
Yeah, that's why I touched on it earlier. I wanted to clarify to make sure everyone knew that there was nobody living there.
One of the comments made, Barbara, Ms. Mugabe, you mentioned a statement earlier that the existing building is on town land. Are you talking about the side yard on Johnson Avenue, or is that the part of the house that's sitting on town property? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is so.
And how much is the existing building itself on town land?
Let me see if I can get the site plan.
And just as you're looking that up, is Mr. Hennessy taking a look at building a structure that is parallel with, I guess is that the right word, with the existing structure? Is it going to line up with that existing structure, and so it also would be on town property? Is that correct or not? Or to be set back from Johnson Avenue from the sidewalk further off of town property?
I guess the question really for the planner would be, is the zoning bylaw amendment looking for relief on the severed parcel?
Yes, so on the severed parcel, the relief is required because the proposed lot size is too small for the R2 zone. And that's the only relief that's required for the severed parcel.
Right, so the setbacks will, they're not asking for relief on the setbacks. So in other words, on the severed parcel, the new building would have to meet the setbacks from municipal land.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Is that correct, Barbara?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair. The proposed dwelling would have to meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw in terms of the yard setbacks.
Okay, thanks for that. And Barbara, Ms. Mugabe, comment was made site plan is not accurate. Can you comment on that, please? Like, I'm confused. The comments from both Mahon saying the site plan is not accurate. Is it or isn't it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the site plan is accurate. It's based on the survey that was recently prepared, and it was prepared by a qualified surveyor. So the site plan is accurate. I have submitted a copy to Ms. Mahon just for her review. So she has seen the submitted survey.
Okay. And you have a copy of the survey?
Yes, I do.
That's all for now, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Mayor. Thanks.
Yep. Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is for Ms. Mugabe. In your report, you talk about the approval of the consent application, which I realized was earlier before the new information from the survey, will result in the existing dwelling losing the non-conforming status that it currently has. Will that also apply to if a zoning amendment was approved?
Yes, so when you go through consent, that will affect the status of the current dwelling. So it will be required to meet the zoning bylaw, and it does not meet the zoning bylaw because it is encroaching into the road allowance. There's not enough front yard setback. So then we have to address that through this current zoning bylaw amendment application to grant it relief for the front yard setback, yes.
So I think what I'm then going to ask is, would that make, if this was approved, would that make the existing house legal non-compliant?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct.
And so if this was approved, I think what your report says is that if that house was ever taken down and replaced with something else, then the new structure would have to be fully compliant.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, the new structure would have to be compliant. The zoning bylaw says it must be built to the standard of the current zoning bylaw, and the current zoning bylaw requires that it meets today's standard of development. So it will be required to comply.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that if this was approved, it would be legal, but it would still be non-compliant.
Yes, that's correct. And as part of the amending bylaw, I'm suggesting that we include wording to the effect that the relief being granted is only in relation to the existing dwelling, so that future development would be required to comply.
Thank you.
Councilor Wyatt, and then the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, I'm a little bit confused, which isn't that uncommon, but when I look at the overview that is provided, it looks to me as though the non-compliant portion of the existing house is that it is built right at the property line on the Johnson Avenue side. It's not actually on the town land, but it's actually got a 0 meters setback. Is that correct? There's not, the building isn't actually built on the town property. And then I can see on the Waterloo side, it looks like part of the driveway and part of the walkway is in fact encroaching on town land, but the structure itself is all within the lot, albeit right at the limit, 0 setback. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, the structure is actually spilling into the road allowance.
On the Johnson Avenue side?
That's correct, yes.
Like the photo that we're looking at there with all the snow, presumably last winter, and I can see a speed limit sign there. That's the part of the building that is on town property. That little must have been, looks like an addition at some point in history. Is that right?
I can't speak to whether or not it was an addition at some point, but I do know that it is in fact within the road allowance, yes.
Okay, so we're being asked here, or the presentation is from the applicant looking to A, correct and get a legal non-conforming status of his existing property, and B, to sever off the back half into a separate lot. There's really two applications here. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the zoning amendment application is really to facilitate the consent application. Without the consent application, there is no need for a zoning amendment.
In order to get the consent, the applicant needs the zoning bylaw amendment. This piece has to be recognized in order for the consent to proceed. So it's the intent. The applicant's desire is to get a consent, not to deal with the situation with the house. It's just that he has to deal with the situation with the house in order to get the consent.
Right. We have to recognize the status of the house as non-conforming, legal non-conforming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I understand now. Thanks very much.
Okay. Are there further? Oh, sorry. The Vice Deputy Mayor was next. Vice Deputy Mayor.
That's okay. I just, with the second piece of property that's vacant now, and Mr. Hennessy has asked for to build a new residence on there. Just remind me, Barbara or Jay, what is the current bylaw state in terms of lot coverage for a structure for a parcel of land? I don't have that in front of me. Do you have that?
I'll be looking when I'm talking, but it's 40 or 45% for this area of town.
45% lot coverage?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from members of council? Don't see any. All right. So that brings us to the end of this public meeting, and perhaps I'll ask Ms. Mugabe to just let the public know how they can stay informed on this application and be updated on any decisions the council may make on it?
Yes, so this application is on the website, and if anybody wishes to submit comments, they can do so. The email address is bcplpe@brucecounty.on.ca.
Good, thank you. Okay, so that brings us to the end of 5.2, and we're on to our final public meeting for the evening, which is 5.3 Z 2021-083 by Jennifer Ferguson for 272 Saugeen Beach Road. And we will turn it over to our planner, Ms. Mugabe, for the presentation.
Yes, thank you once again, Mr. Mayor. I'll just load up the screen. So this zoning amendment application was submitted by Ms. Jennifer Ferguson, and her property is 272 Saugeen Beach Road, which is located in the former town of Saugeen. The site is across from the lake, and there are seasonal cottages to the north, to the south, and to the east. The site is presently occupied by a cottage. There's municipal water and septic system for services. The existing septic system is entirely within the road allowance, and so is the deck, which is attached to the cottage. The green structure that you see on the north side is actually a neighbor's cottage. It's not part of Ms. Ferguson's property. This is the back of the property and the rear of the cottage. I should mention that there is no on-site parking. All parking is currently on the street. The landowner wishes to redevelop the site with a 2-story seasonal cottage and a garden shed. The new cottage will be constructed at the front lot line. There'll be no driveway or garage, so parking will continue to be on the street. A new septic system is proposed in the rear yard. The next couple of slides, I'll just walk you through the proposed structure, the elevations of the proposed structure. This is the elevation looking at the site from the roadway. This is the east elevation or the rear of the proposed cottage. This is the north side. And finally, this is the south side. The county mapping showed, it actually shows an environmental protection zone in the frontage of this site. Because the environmental protection zone does not allow residential development, we advise the applicant that as part of this process, they must amend the zoning bylaw to allow for new residential development within the environmental protection zone. But when we received comments from the Conservation Authority, they advised that the hazard land is actually situated 5.5 meters from the subject land. As such, there should not be an environmental protection zone or designation on the subject land. So the site should entirely be within a residential designation and zone. So based on this information, an amendment respecting the environmental protection zone is not required. The residential zone on the site is residential first density special R1-2. This zone applies to not just the subject land, but to an extensive area bordered by the Saugeen Beach Road to the west, Bruce Road 33 to the east, Bruce Road 25 to the north, and Concession 4 to the south. The subject land needs a new site-specific zone to address the deficiencies associated with the proposed development. So the purpose of this application would be to apply a new site-specific zone to facilitate redevelopment. The special zone will carry forward the existing special provision relating to the requirement for the lots to accommodate on-site septic system in order for development to occur. Relief is requested to reduce the front yard setback from 6 meters to 0 meters. Relief is requested to reduce the north side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 1.2 meters, and the south side yard setback from 3 meters to 1.52 meters. Relief is also requested to reduce the required parking spaces from 2 spaces to 0. And finally, relief is requested to locate the garden shed 0.6 meters from the rear and interior lot lines, whereas the minimum requirement is 1.2 meters. Some additional information. Port Elgin is a settlement area, and in accordance with the provincial policy statement, it shall be the focus of growth and development. The proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statement. The site is designated primary urban communities in the Bruce County official plan and shoreline residential in the Saugeen Shores official plan. Both plans permit residential development. The site is zoned residential first density special R1-2, and the zone permits a single detached dwelling. We have circulated the application to the departments, and we have received comments from the departments. I just need to get the town of Saugeen Shores staff do not object to the proposal. They have advised that the encroaching structures, being the septic system and the existing deck, should be removed prior to the issuance of a building permit for the new dwelling. The new septic system locational requirements may need to be examined further at the building permit stage to ensure appropriate separation from property lines and structures. There's no objection from the historic Saugeen Métis, and the Conservation Authority advised that the subject property is not directly affected by hazards. They have asked that we update the town's official plan and the zoning bylaw for the subject property or the property directly west of the subject land. The lands are adjacent to fish habitat, but an environmental impact study is not required, as the cottage construction will not have an impact on fish habitat, provided adequate, appropriate erosion and sediment control measures are implemented during construction. Town staff advised that sedimentation and erosion controls will need to be shown on the grading plan required as part of the building permit application, and then carried on site during construction. We received comments from Mr. David Steep. He's the neighbor on the east side. His address is 7 Fendel Lane. The comments were incorporated into the staff report, but he has since asked us to disregard those comments, and instead he wanted me to relay these comments to committee. The comments are: the applicant's property is very close to my site property line. I support the applicant's application wholeheartedly. The new cottage proposed and the desired setbacks from the property lines seem very reasonable to me. I'm confident the amendments proposed will be an improvement to the property and the property values in the immediate vicinity, and there will be no negative impact. There were no other comments from members of the public. As a summary, this zoning bylaw amendment is requested to replace the residential first density special R1-2 zone with a new site-specific zone to facilitate development. The new special zoning will carry forward the existing special provision relating to the requirement for the lots to accommodate on-site septic system. The amendment is seeking to reduce the north side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 1.2 meters, and the south side yard setback from 3 meters to 1.52 meters. Relief is requested to reduce the front yard setback from 6 meters to 0 meters, and the required parking from 2 spaces to 0. Relief is also requested to locate the garden shed 0.6 meters from the rear and south lot lines, whereas the minimum requirement is 1.2 meters. In terms of a recommendation, the recommendation is for committee to receive this application as information. The intent is to come back at a subsequent meeting and bring a report that will have recommendations and would also address comments and feedback from committee. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. And that moves us then on to our public meeting and the applicant. And we do have the applicant with us this evening, Jennifer Ferguson. Oh, and there's Ms. Ferguson and a couple of others. So Ms. Ferguson, over to you. Any comments for us?
Hi, just wanted to say thanks to the council members and Barbara and Jay and the planning department for their work and presentation. And we will be very happy to work with staff on any details, comments associated with the design. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And so I'll just verify with the planner and the clerk that we don't have other members of the public waiting to speak to us this evening.
No, we do not, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so with that then we'll go to members of the committee and we'll start with the deputy mayor and then Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just one comment about the presentation. I've asked before that we have photographs to show the exact locations. I can't tell where the road is on these diagrams, what front, what back. So if we can make sure that we have diagrams that show relative positioning, like from the road, so we can see, you know, what's happening, that'd be good. I'm all for the people tearing this down and building a new house. However, I do believe that when they're doing this, there should be a driveway put in, no parking on the road. We will be developing and working on Saugeen Beach Road. They need to have a driveway. And I think that should be part of the plan as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Grace, and then we'll get the vice deputy mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions. So in the report, it talks about the fact that the plan is to use an Elgin system of a septic tile bed, which is a commonly used system where it's difficult to accommodate a conventional system. But one of the comments, I guess, from the planning staff is, if the septic system should fail later, there may not be sufficient space elsewhere on site to install a conventional system. So my question is, I guess, what's the, if anybody here knows it, what's the success rate, I guess you could say, for the Elgin system? Does it provide sufficient capacity to service the increase in the proposed square footage of the new build?
We'll go to the Supervisor of Development Services.
Yeah, just two items there. Thank you, Mayor Charbonneau. The first is I don't have an answer about the quality of the septic, but our concern, to clarify, was that the code requires a certain distance for the placement of the septic from the property line and buildings. So you can't build it too close to a building, for example, and you can't put it too close to a property line. So there maybe needs to be some consideration of that before we finalize the site plan. And so that was really why I was commenting.
Okay, I have one more question, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. And this is also a question about parking. And I have a concern about building a new build without a provision for parking space. I mean, we've seen some other situations in cottage areas of historic, situations where there was only parking on the street that led to problems. I drove over there and looked, and this comes, if you're coming from the south, it comes just before sort of a corner that has some large trees, and I think there's actually some kind of a warning sign there about visibility. And so I'm wondering if it's possible to somehow see if you can accommodate some kind of parking on site. like, could there be an adjustment in the square footage to allow, I don't know how much square footage would take to allow a small garage, perhaps attached to the building with a driveway. I know that there was quite a bit of space at the front of the cottage, and I'm assuming that's where you've been parking, but I'm just wondering, that is the road allowance that you've been parking on right now. Is there some way we could, is it necessary for us to work with the property owner to try to see if we can make some kind of arrangement to make sure that they have parking that's off the actual side of the road, especially when you think about this is going to be a nice new modern build, and presumably people might want to come up in the winter time. We have a law that says you can't park on the road between November 1st and March 31st, which would also be another issue.
Yeah, I think so. For for clarity, so for the purposes of this evening's discussion, I think council can focus on whether or not, we can give some direction to staff on whether or not we'd like to see them return with some provision in here requiring dedicated parking for the development, and then they could take that away and work with the property owner to see where there might be options. There might be an option to work with the municipality on providing some parking on the shore road allowance, or there might be other options. You've suggested a couple of them, Councillor. So I think for the purpose of this evening, though, if that's a concern, and I'm hearing it as a concern, it's frankly a concern that I share, that we could ask the planner, supervisor, development services, and staff to work with the applicant to look for a way to come up with dedicated parking and come back to us with an appropriate recommendation. Does that sound fair to everyone? So we can take that away, Ms. McCabe, Mr. Posner. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, the only comment I wanted to make, Mr. Mayor, is, well, a couple things. I think one of the good things is the existing septic tank will be moved to the backyard onto the owner's property. I think that's a good thing. And I'm just wondering about access to that, and it looks like about 5 feet. I'm using feet here now, but it looks like 1.5 meters accessing that septic bed in the future. I guess, Jay, with other septic systems, I guess you can get perhaps a small piece of equipment back there if we ever had to access that septic system. Not very wide to have to service it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are there's certainly with the traditional way septic systems are managed and were installed and I guess maintained, we certainly required a wider setback. I think depending on the engineered system and how people access it, there are ways of doing that. Of course, they're always welcome to work with their neighbors to get access. But we're open to allowing a smaller setback if they understand and acknowledge the need to access the rear from time to time.
One thing I suggest, Mr. Mayor, is that maybe I differ a little bit here, but I think that if you take a look at Saugeen Beach Road, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but if you look historically, the way planning was done years ago, decades and decades ago, parking happened, and it's happening with a lot of the lots on our old original shore road allowance. And I would prefer to think that residents continue to be able to use with, perhaps though, if we think this is present setting, it's a new cottage being torn down, a brand new cottage, want to try and correct the situation, but parking on their own land, it would certainly change their plans substantially. I'm just wondering if there's some kind of and I wonder if the owner would perhaps consider this too, Mr. Mayor, Council would consider it, some kind of a formal agreement, that protects the municipality, risk liability. I don't know, some kind of an agreement where, we permit the parking on the original shore road allowance, which is happening all along that road, that we continue to permit, but with maybe a little more legally. I don't know where I will head with that, but just a thought.
So we're into, yeah, and I get what you're saying. And so just to sort of clarify from a process standpoint. So right now we're meeting as the regulator and regulatory authority talking about the rezoning of this property. And we don't want to slip into talking as their neighbor about a potential land deal. So I think we should not do that. But I think,
okay.
But I think your point is duly noted. Staff's heard it, and I think what we've said tonight, so everyone's clear, is that council's keen to see dedicated parking off the road for this development. I would go further and express my own view that what happens, as Councillor Grace said, when we allow new development to proceed, which relies entirely on the public right of way for parking, is we limit future councils and the public's ability to use that road allowance in either to create no parking zones, to reconstruct the road, make changes. We begin to constrain the public's use of its right of way, and we don't want to do that. So there's a good planning. There's a good reason to plan not to have on-street parking with new development if we can. And so I think we've asked staff to come back and the planner to come back and come up with some options for us, and they can go away and work on that and have hopefully come back with a solution when they have a recommendation. Is there any other comments or questions from members of council? I don't see any. So perhaps Ms. Mugabe, you could just remind the public how they can stay informed about this file.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the public, if they wish to submit comments, they can reach us at bcplpe@brucecounty.on.ca. That applies to if they wish to, if they seek clarification on the proposal.
Excellent. All right, thank you. That brings us then to the end of this public meeting. And of course, council will make a decision on this at a later date. So with that, we've come to the end of the planning agenda. And just before I call for a motion to adjourn, I just wish you all Merry Christmas. And I note that Jay won the evening. He had the coolest jacket, the most festive jacket of the evening. None of the rest of us are festive at all, but good one, Jay. You win. And anyway, have a Merry Christmas, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll reconvene in January. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Grace. All in favor? Council stands adjourned. See you next year.